Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a wrap-up of my recent reads for probably a fortnight period, which contained so far, month 8, August almost over, my favourite novel of the year, and to date my favourite poetry collection of the year. So a really good reading period. So, The Tyranny of Flies by Cuban author Elaine Vilar Madruga, translated by Kevin Jerry Dunn. Sasa Stanisic, Before the Feast, translated by Anthea Bell, who again I think was one of Kafka's well-known translators. Claudia Pineiro, Time with the Flies, Argentinian author. This is translated by Francis Riddell. Snow Dog Foot by Italian author Claudio Morandini, translated by J. Ockenden. And Ryan Chapman, American author, The Audacity. And then the poetry, Bluff by Danez Smith, Stereotype by Jonah Mixon-Webster, Look by Solmaz Sharif, Edgar Lee Masters, Spoon River Anthology, and finally Lavinia Greenlaw, A World Where News Travelled Slowly. So I'm going to start with the novels. Everything is time-stamped if you want to jump ahead to a specific book. So, The Tyranny of the Flies, Elaine Vilar Madruga. I'd never heard of her or the book, but it is name-checked in Claudio Pineiro's book, Time of the Flies. I read 2 books with flies as an extended metaphor in both. I'll talk about this one later. This is one of those wonderful books that sets up this slightly off-kilter social world and never takes its foot off the pedal. It sticks within its own parameters. It is rigorous. It is seamless. In this case, it is very funny. It is very acerbic. It's a satire or a fable about the battle of authority between parents and their children, you know, which lay behind a lot of the 1960s counterculture. But not just that, it's also political commentary. Madruga, as I say, is from Cuba. The island dictatorship here is not named, but it is presumably Cuba. But the thing about it is because it's talking more widely about power struggles, as I say, between parents and children, it also reflects and refracts on our own democracies and the struggle for power and authority within them. So basically, it's 3 children whose names all begin with C. We've got Cassandra, the older daughter, who's I think 14. We've got Caleb, the middle boy, and then we've got Claudia, the youngest girl, who's about to be 3 years old, who has never spoken since she's been born. And they each have what I would say is a kink. I don't mean a sexual kink, although in Cassandra's case it is, which makes them very, very sort of out there. And their parents are the sort of chief of internal security for this dictatorship, who has had lots of torturers under his command. And his sort of rescued wife, who's a poor peasant but ambitious, poor orphan but ambitious. And let me talk about the 3 kids, because they're the main voices in here, although each character gets a fair whack of chapters within here. So Cassandra is very worldly wise, but she has a paraphilia. That is, she is attracted to inanimate objects, sexually attracted to inanimate objects, prefers them over people, and actually acts on those desires. I won't go into detail in case this video is taken off by YouTube. Caleb is like an angel of death to animals, so they weekly visits to the zoo as very young children. And all the animals who are so miserable in their cages and their captivity, they press themselves up against the cage when he walks past because they want to be touched by him and put out their misery, literally, you know, like the angel of death passing over them. And this continues outside of the zoo, that any animal he comes into contact with has thrown itself forward to basically be killed by him, to be released. And then Claudia, the daughter who doesn't speak, she spends all her time drawing these absolutely anatomically correct, sort of lifelike pictures of animals, and she goes through different phases. When the book opens, her current phase is that she draws elephants, but when she draws butterflies, it gets very sinister because that has connotations for her mother, because her mother's backstory is that all her family committed suicide in a sort of religious cultish way, and it was associated with butterflies. So the mother dreads when the phase of drawing for her youngest daughter turns to butterflies, and then she moves from butterflies to flies, and hence the flies of the title, because the extended metaphor of flies is brilliant in here. But we get this sort of struggle because the father rules the house with a rod of iron, and is very disappointed in his children because they are each so strange in their own ways, and initially he sort of almost absents himself from them, and the mother is in her own sort of locked up world of a sort of frustrated goals and ambitions. So the children sort of are free to pursue what they pursue, but the father has a brother and sister-in-law who are involved in a bomb plot to assassinate the president, and that loses him his sort of privileged position within the dictatorship. And he's not under house arrest, but he gets so paranoid that he won't let any other members of his family leave the house, including Cassandra, who can't go and visit her in Amarata, which is a rusty old bridge. And it's just this sort of brilliant, sort of slow-moving, acerbic sort of war of attrition between the father, who's trying to instill discipline on his children, and the children who aren't having any of it. And as I say, just it's a slightly out there domestic world that is created, but it never drops its style and its tone. It is beautifully done. And as I say, from the war of the personal, you get these wider social and political issues. It's just fantastic. I was absolutely swept along by this. 5 stars. I just would like to say that I'm not aware of any of her other work having yet been translated, but I hope on the basis of this, which came out last year, I hope more of her work is translated. And then we come to Sasa Stanisic before the feast. So Stanisic was of Bosnian Serb origin, had to flee the former Yugoslavia when it collapsed into civil war, and has ended up in Germany. He's written 3 novels. This is the middle one, but I've now read all 3, although obviously I've read them out of order. And I really, really like this guy because he's a fabulous writer about community. So in his first novel, The Soldier Repairs the Gramophone, that was a book about a disappeared culture of, you know, the sort of Bosnian Serbs, but also sort of Yugoslavia wider rural Yugoslavia, which was obviously, you know, torn apart by the war and the ethnic cleansing and stuff. In his last novel, which I can't remember its name, annoyingly, but that was about the community of immigrants who'd gone into Germany, but were sort of denied legal and economic status, and were just sort of hanging around sort of listlessly. This is different. This is slightly more. This is set in Germany, in the countryside, in a small village which sort of has 2 lakes, and it's a beautiful rendering of the life of the village. So it's the night before their annual feast, which is just a booze up, and various characters and delving back into history. So some of the characters, we get the ferryman who ferries people across the lake. We get the bell ringer. We get an East German military colonel who's retired and is sort of, you know, completely without purpose and is sort of considering suicide. We get the chronicler. We get the local priest. So just a whole panoply of characters sort of weaving in and out on this one night before the feast. And we get obviously the modern relationships and dreams and frustrated ambitions, but we also get folklore. We get things like sort of witch burning history and execution, you know, sort of the church chronicle of sort of executions for theft and things. And it's just, again, normally I wouldn't be interested in particularly things like folklore and stuff, but it's done so well here. Some of the storytelling is just absolutely fabulous. 5 stars. This guy never lets me down. And on to Claudia Pineiro, Time of the Flies. So she's, of course, most famous for Eleanor Knows. This is another one of her sort of crime-flecked novels, but she's really interested in the sort of psychology of the characters involved. So two female cellmates, one who's been in for murder for her ex-husband's mistress. She murdered her and was sentenced to 15 years. And is best mates with a woman who's sort of 3 strikes and out kind of thing on drug dealing. And they're both released quite soon, one after the other, and they form a company whereby the murderer, she's an exterminator or a fumigator, and the other one, the ex-drug dealer, is a private investigator, and they have this sort of joint company. And the fumigator basically has a sort of tight geographical area of her clients, but she has 2 outliers, and one day she's sort of working at one of these outliers, who makes her a proposal by saying, can you work with poisons to kill insects and stuff, can you get hold of me one that I could use to kill somebody, but like you, I want to kill a mistress for my husband, even though the husband is never around. And she says money no object, and gives her a down payment of, I think, $10,000, which is a huge amount of money to this woman. So it all proceeds from there, really. But I think sort of, obviously I can't go into spoilers and stuff, but it's not just a crime novel. It's superior to that. If you compare it to something like Wild Houses by Colin Barrett, which I reviewed in my last roundup, and I'll post the link to that, which is on the book along list. That was purely a crime novel, which, like this one, tried to sort of deal with the psychology of the people involved, but was so unsatisfying. I really didn't like that book. I gave it 2 stars. Whereas this is much more engrossing, much more involving. The characters are much more sympathetic. For example, the drug dealer has a crush on her friend, but has never, admitted to it. She also has breast cancer, which kind of persuades the fumigator to take this job, even though it's going to drag her back into what she's tried to leave behind for 15 years, because she wants to pay for the surgery for her friend, because the state health system, it will never get done. So there's a lot of emotion stuff. But the interesting thing here is the fumigator talks in terms of, well, she's been out of circulation, society for 15 years, and obviously society has changed. And she particularly picks up on language, on the words you can and can no longer say and what they've been replaced by, which he finds tricky. But she's sort of having to navigate it. And towards the end, we see exactly why this is this is important to her, because it becomes a part of the plot into this sort of internecine, labyrinthine sort of unravelling of she's providing this poison to this woman, and there's a reason for it, which comes back to this sort of change of language and labelling and identity politics in a really clever way that I hadn't sort of foreseen. I thought it was an oddity, but interesting, that she felt out of her time and out of the language. But actually it becomes very central and very core. So, it was a pretty good read, 4 stars. And on to Snow Dog Foot. So this is about a hermit who lives in the Italian Alps, really doesn't like being around people. And every summer he goes up higher to get away from the tourists, but in the winter he can come down lower because there are fewer people about. And he stocks up for 3-4 months to see out the winter. He's adopted by a stray dog, so it's just the 2 of them. And the book starts with him going to do his supply run to stock up. And when he goes to the one village shop, they go, well, you were only in here last week, you've done this shop. He said, did I? I can't remember. So there's obviously something wrong with his mind, some sort of senescence. And then we get him sort of waiting out the winter, just him and the dog. And then as the winter begins to slowly thaw, they see a human foot in a shoe sticking out of the snow, which presents a whole new world of decisions and that he has to make. And in the sort of flashbacks, we get about his terrible childhood under the occupation of the Nazis, in which he hid in underground tunnels, which is where he sort of developed this sort of dislike of other people, but also an ability to, live on without sort of much in the way of sustenance, of food and water. And it all feeds into this very simple sort of three-part, preparing for winter, surviving winter, and the great thaw, the slow thaw, and the gradual revelation of this body and what his reaction to it is. But I was carried along, but I thought this is slightly limited. But by the end, and again I can't give spoilers, it was really, really well done, because we realised what the problem with his memory was down to. Was it down to his sort of traumatic childhood of being isolated underground, or was it overhead power lines that seemed to cause all sorts of health issues for many in the village? And so these had been drip fed sort of as flashbacks, but very they weren't obvious, they were sort of there in the background, and then he pulls it all together by the end and in the ending itself. And it really raised, it's not often that endings can actually raise a book for me, but this did, so 4 stars. And on to The Audacity by Ryan Chapman. So Ryan Chapman's debut book, called Riots I Have Known, which was published 2019. I love this book, and I've always been surprised that he's, admittedly this is his only book until this one just came out in April. I was always surprised that more people didn't pick this up, because I was definitely a cheerleader for it. It's very funny, it's very witty. It's about a prisoner who has the job of being the editor of the poetry magazine for the other cons, and a riot is going on. He's locked himself in this sort of new sort of arts and creative wing of the prison, which he helped get funding for because of the success of the prison literary magazine. And so he's safe in there until the time when they will finally be able to break through. And all the time the question is, are they after him? Is he being targeted? And if so, is it because someone that didn't like the criticism he gave of their poem? It was just, I loved it, it was brilliant. But no one really seems to have sort of picked up and amplified it, which I think is a shame. But I was always looking forward to his follow-up, which is this, The Audacity. So again, the same witty, acerbic, humorous style, but this is set in prison amongst desperate people. This is set in the world of the uber-rich, the Jeff Bezos level of multi-billionaires. And they sort of form a group like sort of the Davos, meetings of all the great movers and shakers in the world. And they're brought together on this privately owned Caribbean island by one of their number, because they're going to have a sort of 3-day session where they're going to pick one issue in the world and eradicate it through channeling all their giving. Instead of dispersing it amongst all their people's private and pet causes, they're gonna like, once they've chosen it and come up with an implementation plan, all the money will be devoted to it from these people, and it will eradicate the issue. And one of the invitees was supposed to be Victoria Stevens, who runs a medical pharma company, pharma research, and they claim they're on the brink of curing cancer. But the breakthrough drugs are not coming through, and it's revealed that it's a Ponzi scheme, and that her wealth is built on the back of this. And she disappears, presumed she's gone off to take her life. But the husband, called Guy, thinks this is highly unlikely, but he knows he's been left to take the fall, because they're all going to come after him, both financially, but the press, because they can't find his wife. He knew nothing about it. It was a total surprise to him. Now, he himself is a bit of a failure, a bit of a dropout. His only function, once he married her in a sort of transactional relationship, was he ran her foundation. He ran her philanthropic side, while she got on with the hard business side of things. And the book opens and this sort of circuit of philanthropic events where, you know, the attendees are expected to get their checkbooks out. And interestingly, in that, one of the guys on his table, who he knows, because it's the same people at all these dues, says, you know, the problem for our class is that there aren't any books, there's no art made about us. And he goes, well, what do you mean? He says, well, none of us, you know, we sort of have all these pieces and profiles done in magazines and stuff, but none of us sits down to write the great work of art about our class, which isn't true, because Hernan Diaz Trust absolutely does that, and to great effect, even though it's a bit of a takedown. But the point is, I don't think you could have a Jeff Bezos type person writing a genuine work of art that moved us, because they're coming from the status of, you know, immense wealth and stuff. So I didn't quite understand that, because this character Guy, he's married into wealth. He himself isn't wealthy, and once he discovers that his wife has run off and he's going to carry the can, one of his trustees says, look, you've got to join us, you know, on the press campaign. Come to where she's disappeared in San Francisco. Join the search for her, either her body or whatever. But instead, he takes up Victoria's invitation to go to this island, to this conference, because he's he runs the foundation. So because she can't attend, he's going to attend. He has no interest in the conference itself. He's just going to blitz himself on unlimited provided drink and illicit, but always demands met for drugs. That's all he wants to do. Is he's in a state of denial, and he just wants to blitz himself out. So the problem is that these characters are not sympathetic in any way, because they're uber rich. We don't have any sympathy with them. They're cynical. It's a really good statement, this book, about the mentality of these people and the greed and the sort of delusion and denial of things under their very eyes. But it's very hard to become involved in it, because these people, you know, whatever the ending, we don't care. And if Guy is successful in a, you know, successful resolution, or he commits suicide, you know, whatever it is, and I'm not going to spoil it for you, we don't care, because not only is he a member of the uber rich, he himself isn't even, you know, he's a parasite on it in a way. He admits it's a transactional marriage. So it's really hard to warm to this. It's very well written, as I say. It's sort of very clever, and it's sort of offhand lines that these sort of uber rich people sort of just throw out without thinking, casually. It's a really good takedown. But they don't suffer enough. You know, whatever the ending, and again, I'm not going to tell you, you know, it could be death, or it could be saving the situation of this Ponzi scheme. It's not enough. They don't suffer enough. So, as I say, I felt disappointed, slightly cheated by this, for all its merits. 3 stars. Now, onto the poetry. So, Bluff by Danez Smith is my favourite poetry collection of the year to date. It starts off with a sort of, it's called Anti-Poetica. It's a real sort of gauntlet thrown down for the start of this book, where it's sort of listing all the things that poetry can't do. Can't save your life, can't change your life. And it's a very bold opening move. And then the next poem is called Ars America, brackets in the hold, and it's about a slave ship and the slaves in the hold, stacked together, looking up where they can see the stars. And in a way, that's what this collection is, I believe. It's a State of America address, or State of the Union, you know, but not by the president, but by a foremost poet of contemporary America, Danez Smith. It is full of passion, anger, love, obviously, you know, the fact that nothing has changed in racial politics in the US, you know, for all Black Lives Matter. You know, there's a stunning poem called Minneapolis St. Paul, which is where George Floyd was actually shot. And it's just brilliant, because it's posing the question of, well, when something like that happens, when yet another Afro-American man is killed by the police and he's unarmed and he's an innocent, you have to react. What reaction can you do? Well, you know, you go and demonstrate and protest, and you're kept at arm's length by the police. You're not heard, and then that can very easily turn into riots. And the poem is a very skillful consideration of, it's wrong to riot, but sometimes you have absolutely no choice. So this is the opening of the poem. It happened again. This time they did it with a knee. Cause of death, $20. Police. For George Floyd, the crowd stretches down Chicago Avenue, cutting the city through the 3rd precinct, just how I-94 once ripped Rondo without question or apologies. On Hiawatha, a few blocks from the now destroyed precinct, there's a daycare playground full of little black kids. Some blessed, little fades and puffs and hijabs, little hands gripping the fence, little feet jumping, little mouths a chaos of smile and chant. Black lives matter, black lives matter. They say it with their teeth and whole bodies. When was the first time that they knew those lives mattered? Do these toddlers already know that some propose counter-arguments? When we make it to the precinct, my love and I join the line flanking westbound Lake Street. And for us, the protest is one of guarding others. We wade through the rain, redirecting cars, only 2 or 3 of them giving us grief. As the rain picks up and the crowds disperse, we start the 3-mile walk back to the car, and we see the precinct up close for the first time since arriving. A busted door, folks at the windows and on the cars. Good, I think myself. Though I'm scared. Cops love cops and buildings more than they love the people. 5 blocks from the precinct and the sounds rush our ears. The boom, 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 boom of flash grenades, tear gas, the drum of rubber bullets hitting protesters, the sound of something, everything, dropping. And then this little, so that's sort of prose poetry, but it's intercut with actual sort of poetry. And from that is, for too long our age been sleep, inside our grief robbed them deep. So I just think that's a brilliant, brilliant poem. And then I'm going to read one more in its entirety. It's only 1 page long. Just there. 27. It's called You Don't Even Know Me / I'm Hanging from a Tree. You don't even know me, I'm hanging from a dream. Me, in my last life, savage, siren wet, and dream lynched me. Was good as pussy, 9 lives all murdered. For my talent at my colour, my sex, whatever he killed me for. I was best at it. Best blood-lit dusk, best clotted sweetness, best bluing me. Once I was born, the rope, not the neck. Once I was fire full of N-words. You know it's happened. Someone said that someone heard about the building candled while full of screaming little wicks and laughed. I was never that laugh. I was the hymn of nearing sirens in the dying ear, announcing not yet, sound entering and touching the mind. I was mine once. And again in this life I'm mostly my own, somewhere far from your knowing, deep in a black mood. The weight of my heart making its way to my brain, carrying information, secrets, the rumour of my body, the story I tell for wealth, and the wealth is worthless. They keep killing me every time I'm back by summer. I crawl out the sun, gold is useless, but in every life I have it. Look at me up here, dangling like the poplar's hidden tongue, like my tongue. Look past the party at my feet, the children giddy for a scorched finger. Look me in what was my face, deep into the smoky pit I used to pray and kiss, find my final plaque-worn star. So that gives you an idea of the sort of the fury and the anger. And it's fair to call it righteous anger, not self-righteous, but righteous, that sort of flows throughout this collection. And then finally, again, just another couple of stanzas. This is from a poem called I'm Not Bold, I'm Fucking Traumatized. Does it bother you when somebody talks about your people as a concept, right? In front of your face? What does your skin feel like when it's evaporating into theory? Mine like sugar dissolving in the sleeping mouth, taking the tooth with it. Brilliant, just absolutely stunning collection. 5 stars. And onto a book that is actually name-checked in the author's notes in the back. This is Stereotype by Jonah Mixon-Webster. Again, sort of poetry, some sort of typographical poems and stuff. And it starts off really well, I feel. But then, towards the end, we get a long section on the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and mainly affecting an Afro-American, community. And it's a really good, solid read if you don't know about that. But it takes up a lot of space within what is quite a small collection, really, when you sort of review it as a whole. And although it does spark off poems after that, I just felt, I can't say it didn't need it, because if that wasn't in there, it'd be an even shorter collection. But I just felt, again, slightly cheated in terms, I wanted more of the poems that preceded it. A couple of those poems are written in sort of street gangster, sort of thug language, and were really interesting. There's a really good prose poem about what if Sisyphus of ancient Greek myth was Afro-American or black, and he wasn't rolling a boulder up, but it was a giant watermelon. And of course, every time like Sisyphus, every time he goes up to the top, it falls down to the bottom and it gets even bigger. And then one day, he decides he's had enough of this and he eats it. He just absolutely sort of gouges on it and feeds himself. And then freed of his burden, he then goes to tackle the gods who sent him there in the first place. He was an athlete, and the gods were jealous of his prowess. And it's hilarious. I'm not going to spoil it for you when he basically goes to face down the gods. So there's some really good stuff in here. But I also felt there was stuff that sort of diluted it, really. Diluted its power. Not its power, because the Flint, Michigan stuff is powerful. But if you already know the story of it, if you've read up on it, it's this sort of solid block of text. It's not poetry. It's sort of documentary reportage with links to various reports on the safety. It gives the government, the local government, recommended practice of boiling water when there were boil water alerts. So it's very it's very informative. But I'm just not sure. I suppose most people aren't familiar with it, particularly people outside of the US. But for me, I just felt it sort of got in the way, really. So I gave it 3.5 stars. On to Look by Solmaz Sharif, who's an American poet of Iranian origin. I think her family fled from Iran during the Iraq-Iran war, and there's a lot about that in here. But of course, as migrants, and particularly as Muslim migrants in sort of late 20th century, early 21st century America, they're treated as in a fairly hostile way, so much so that they're sort of still in the midst of a war where the locals are looking askance on them, and of course after 9/11 it gets even worse. So this is a book of poems about trying to repossess certain words which seem innocent but actually are in the manual of the American military, where they take on sinister meanings, because they're either euphemisms to white out the fact of mass killings under sort of indiscriminate bombing or whatever, or they're sort of terms about sort of combating terrorism, where, as I say, innocent words are sort of wrangled into these sinister meanings. And this book is trying to sort of reclaim those words and sort of dust off their sort of sinister patina and get to some sort of everyday living of life, which isn't possible because they're always under scrutiny, always under suspicion. So I think really clever. 4 stars. The Spoon River Anthology. So one of my commentators below the line in my last video asked me if I'd heard of this, and I hadn't. So I picked it up. It's written, I think, in about the 1920s. 1915. And it's a really well executed book to give the history from the Revolution through the Civil War to Prohibition of a small community through their sort of graveyard, where each of the poems is sort of like an epitaph. I mean, they're not actual epitaphs, obviously, because they're slightly richer. So you get stories about each person sort of talks about their lives. So the successes, the failures, the frustrated, the unfaithful, both wives and husbands, those left at the altar. you get the sort of the moralists, you get the two sort of warring great sort of business titans in the context of this village, and you know how they were always trying to outdo one another. You get the guy who built the coffins, who tried out the coffin and the velvet for when his own death was going to come. You got the grave diggers. So the whole panoply, as I say, Civil War, American War of Revolution, right through to Prohibition, and the sort of the moralists and the religious types versus the libertines. And it is really well done, but it never really rose off the page for me. It was all tightly contained, as if not only spatially, because you only had the sort of the length of an epigraph or a gravestone to etch on, but historically the language was somewhat bounded. Although ironically, the poems I enjoyed the most were the ones which had references to classical Greek and Roman times. Slightly ironic because they're the most historical. But you know, impressive for all that. 3.5 stars. And finally to Lavinia Greenlaw, A World Where News Travelled Slowly. So this is one of those collections that is mainly dominated by the poet looking out her window, observing things, or on a walk and observing nature, and composing a poem to some object or some view, which, unless your whole collection is of that, and this isn't, I find them sort of random. I find them unanchored. Now, that's not to say they can't be beautiful in and of themselves if they hit the right metaphorical vein. But I was a little underwhelmed by this collection, I have to say, and I gave it 3 stars. So there you have it. So just to go through, because as I say, 2 of my best books of the year so far contained within this. The Tyranny of the Flies by Elaine, Vilar, Madruga, 5 stars. Sasa, Stanisic, Before the Feast, 5 stars. Claudio, Pineiro, Time of the Flies. Oh, I didn't say in this, I should have said, obviously as a fumigator, and she's very ecologically minded, you know, she doesn't want to harm the environment with real toxic poisons. But the one creature she won't destroy are flies. Flies have a very important sort of metaphorical weight in her world. She has a floater in her eye, which she knows is a floater. She knows is a condition, but to her brain can't filter it out. That she thinks she's got a fly buzzing around in her eye, a silent fly. It makes no noise. She knows what it is, but her brain can't, as I say, can't sort of filter it out or mutate it to something else. So flies form a very significant part in this, as they do in Tyranny of the Flies. Anyway, 4 stars. Snow Dogfoot by Claudio Morandini, 4 stars. And then The Audacity by Ryan Chapman, a disappointing 3 stars. And then the poetry collections, Bluff by Danez, 5 stars. Stereotype by Jonah, Mixon-Webster, 3.5 stars. Look by Solmaz, Sharif, 4 stars. Spoon River Anthology by Edgar Masters, I think I said 3 stars, might be 3.5. And Lavinia Greenlaw, A World Where News Travelled Slowly, 3 stars. And that's it for this week. Till next time, thanks very much.